So in the last chapter, we got to look at some of the brushes and especially my custom brushes. And we also got to see a little bit of the idea of what paper grain can do for your canvas in terms of how your brush interacts with the canvas. And so now I want to carry that concept forward with this whole chapter devoted to how to work with paper in Painter. So the first thing let's go ahead and do here is just open up a brand new document so that we have a clean slate to work with. And I'm just going to go new. And I'm just going to leave it at the Painter 12 default and hit OK. And then I'm going to zoom into 100% because it's usually a good idea to work at 100% if you want to see these kinds of things. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my canvas to clear quickly. So I'm going to go select all, and then I'm going to do select hide marquee because remember we have those marching ants. And then I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that I remember whenever I want to clear, I'm going to go to edit clear. That said, let's go ahead and change to a brush type here that's going to allow us to see the various different types of grains that we might have. Now, the chalks would be an excellent choice. The Conti would be an excellent choice. The pencil and the pastels would be excellent choices. Some of the real watercolors would also be good choices. The marker might be a good choice. So you really have a lot of choices. I'm going to go ahead and go with Conti, which happens to be one of my favorite. And I'm going to do the real soft Conti. And I'm also going to get a color that looks something like a Conti crayon. So let me just go ahead and just push this down and maybe pull this guy over a little bit like so. Not quite. There we go. So that's pretty much what a real Conti crayon looks like. So I'm going to go to edit, clear. Now what you were seeing when I was making those marks was the paper grain interacting with the brush. So if we go to window and we go down to paper panels and then we just go ahead and open papers. Now notice the keyboard shortcut for that is Control-9. And this is actually a two-part palette, or at least it will be by default. You can always rip these apart and then there'll be two separate palettes. But to begin with, it has two tabs. We have papers and then paper libraries. And as we're working, we'll learn a lot more about how to work with libraries. But for right now, just understand that a library holds many papers that you're not necessarily working with. In the same way that what you're seeing here is the paper libraries. As a matter of fact, you can see that they're identical. And we're able to pick whatever paper we want to on the fly. Here, we're just able to move stuff in and out of these libraries. Now, in addition to that, we also have some buttons at the bottom here that'll allow us to work with papers in this library in ways that we couldn't over here. So the main papers palette here is really, really powerful, and it enables us to do some really nice things. Now, one of the first things that I want to show you here is when you're comparing papers or you're comparing brushes, there's a really nice trick that you can use that will help you to get precise results each time. And if we go up to brushes, you'll see there's an option here to record stroke. So I'm going to hit record stroke, and then I'm just going to go ahead and make a little mark like so. And then I'm going to go back to brushes, and I'm going to say playback stroke. And now every time I click, it will play back that stroke. And that doesn't seem like it's all that big of a deal until you realize that if I change my paper grain, or I change my color, for instance, so maybe let's say that I wasn't happy with that color. Now I've got a little bit of more of a muted color here, or maybe I want a little bit more of a darker color. So you can see I can change and compare what these different colors are going to look like. But in addition to that, I can change the paper qualities and see what those various different paper qualities are going to look like in relationship to a static brushstroke, meaning that brushstroke won't ever change because it was recorded. So let me just go ahead and go edit clear. And now we're going to go ahead and begin to look at some of the different properties of this paper. So I'm going to start with our sort of default brush mark right there, and I'll just move over there using the spacebar. This is our default base on our default basic paper. So let me go ahead and first show you this direction toggle, which I think is incredibly important. I really feel like this should be on all the time in Painter. And the nice thing with Painter 12 now is that when you turn this on, it will remember it from session to session and document to document, meaning that you'll never have to turn this back on once you enable it the first time. Now, notice, of course, that when we turn it on, it turns blue. So if I go ahead and make that mark again, you see we get a completely different mark with that Conti. And the reason why is because we're getting a much more realistic interaction between the brush and the grain of the canvas. So I really highly recommend that this directional toggle be turned on at all times. Now, in addition to that, we can invert this paper, which is this next button right here. And the invert button is not going to do too much in this instance because the paper grain is fairly uniform in brightness and contrast. So let me just go ahead and turn the invert off. Now we can scale up and scale down this paper grain. So let me just go ahead and scale it up, and then you can see that paper grain is much larger now. And if I scale this down, you can see that that paper grain is much finer now. I can also increase or decrease the contrast. Now, what does that mean? When I'm increasing the contrast, I'm getting it closer to black and white. The closer I get it to black and white, the harsher the paper grain is going to be. If I reduce the contrast down below 100%, everything is going to become very gray. And if I take it all the way down to 0, it will be perfectly gray, 50% gray. So what that means as far as when we're creating something with our brush is that we're going to see less grain because there's less contrast. Typically, we want to leave this at 100% unless you have a particular reason for changing it. Likewise, we can change the brightness of the paper. Now, this is going to have less of an obvious effect because it's really meant to work in conjunction with the contrast, meaning that if we were to say, okay, I want to up the contrast really high, but then I want to increase the brightness so that the grain is a lot more biased towards white than black. So if I click that, and let's say I increase the brightness some more, and I click that, and then I decrease the brightness, and I click that. And you can see that we're getting different marks based on how we're adjusting our brightness in relationship to our contrast. So what we effectively have here, and let me just set these back to default values of 100 and 50. What we effectively have here is a miniature image editing application built into the paper's palette. And what it's actually doing is it's manipulating an image that we call the paper grain. And we can have any number of images as paper grain, both in terms of what comes default in the paper libraries with Painter, but also we can create our own paper grain. And I'm going to show you how to do that over the course of this chapter.